Well, we're very lucky tonight to have as our special guest one of the funniest men in football. He's got tens of thousands of followers on his various social media accounts. He's got a regular gig in the Herald Sun and elsewhere. I'm speaking, of course, about Titus O'Reily. Welcome, Titus, to the Demonland podcast.
Oh, well, it's good to be with you. And the funniest man in football. It's a low bar in the football media to be funny, I've got to say.
Well, it got a bit lower, didn't it, just recently with the passing of Lou Richards, probably one of the original funny men in the game. So, one less competitor for you, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I think Lou was one of the first ones. He also led to basically every footy player getting a gig in the media these days, which hasn't always been for the best, really, has it?
No, I think we've all suffered on that front. Look, Titus, we've prepared a list of questions for you to try and tease out your very best material, and I'm just looking at that list now, and question 1 is ask Titus to say something funny. Question 2 is ask Titus to say something else that's funny. And question 3 is a rabbi, a priest, and Alex Neil Bullen walk into a bar. What happens next?
Well, Alex probably get dropped, knowing the way he's going lately. And what's a funny thing I could say? I could probably say that the funniest thing I could say is Mark Neeld is a wonderful coach.
I love it. Titus, can you give us a little background to the genesis of the Titus O'Reily character and your presence on social media? And also, does the 1920s Sydney gangster Herbert Ellis know that you've stolen his identity?
Well, the truth of it all was I didn't start with anything in mind, if that makes sense. I sort of just one day a few friends were starting a website and asked me if I'd contribute some stuff. And I set up a Twitter account and they said they all wanted to have fake names because they were working in certain jobs that they didn't want people to know what they were saying. And so they made me come up with one, not that it's fake, of course. And that's sort of how it happened. And I thought I'd do it for 2 weeks. So I started writing a couple of pieces and I wrote some blog pieces that were, funnily enough, serious pieces because I hadn't written for ever before. And no one read them at all. Not even, my parents read them. It was pretty, debilitating. And then I wrote one about the third time when I was about to give up on it. I wrote one about the constant fear of raising a Carlton supporter.
Yeah, that's my biggest fear.
Yeah, it's a huge fear to have. And although making your child a Melbourne supporter might be just as bad in some ways,
it's cruel.
Sort of signing your child up to a lifetime of misery. But so I started it, and that actually got a few people reading it. But even then, it was small, and Twitter, it just started to build slowly. And I just enjoyed it, and most of it was just tweeting actually during Melbourne games, venting, because it just happened to coincide with, the Bailey/Neeld years, the post-Danaher years that we all just been through, and might still be in.
Humour got you through the Great Depression, as it's
That's
popularly
right.
called.
It just kept going, and then it sort of started as the numbers started to grow, which wasn't really my intention at first because they were all, these things start off pretty small. I just found I enjoyed it and enjoyed writing it, so I just kept doing the writing, and then slowly it just kept building, and then now I get to do it full time. So it's been a fun little thing that kind of came out of nowhere.
Did you get your inspiration at all? Had you sort of read? I don't know if you're familiar with the White Maggot, who ran a site for a couple of years. Again, sort of football satire. Had you sort of seen any of that material, or was it just sort of stuff that came from you? I suppose I'm asking whether you'd had any inspiration from, I don't know, the 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝘀𝗁 or others.
I didn't have any. I didn't know some of the sites that had been around. I hadn't read much at the time, and have since had people point them out to me. I think the thing I'd always liked, just comedy in general. there's a bit of a sports thing going back through, if you're, Andrew Denton, Roy and HG, the Could-Have-Beens, 𝗟𝗏𝘀𝘁𝗃, going back into sort of the 80s, 90s and even before, that I'd sort of always liked. But I actually was probably more, I've always been drawn to things like, The Onion and that sort of satirical stuff from the States that I'd always liked. I was a huge, at the time, and still like him, but I liked Bill Simmons for ESPN. Even though he's very different, he was the first guy I saw once I started doing this a bit that had built a media career from not going through the normal media channels, but actually just first writing a blog and just developing his own thing. And so that's sort of what kind of inspired me a bit.
So how much planning goes into your tweets? Like, is it most of it, is it spur of the moment stuff, or do you have a few pre-written gags ready to go?
It's all spur of the moment. I've never, I think about twice I've pre-written something and come up, and then what always happens is that, the joke doesn't work because, the equivalent of Richmond losing in the final seconds happens, or, you kind of get
I was going to say, surely you've got sort of pre-prepared Richmond material for the inevitable that we see each week.
Yeah, well, you sort of think that then. I've just never really done the pre-stuff. It's always coming up on the time, and it's kind of weird because you're kind of coming up constantly. I've been doing this for 6 years now, and you kind of think, how many tweets can you make up about one league? We're all making jokes about the same thing. So it is a strange kind of occupation we all have doing it. But they all are just spur of the moment. And then the thing with Twitter is some of them are good and some of them are just me venting and some of them are not very good. So but that's the nature of Twitter, you do it and it's out there and then it's gone. So that's sort of the way I look at it. But sometimes you have something just strike you, and the strangest thing is with humour, and there's some people who don't find me funny at all, and they let me know. But sometimes I think, well, that's a really good gag, and I tweet it, and no one likes it, and then another time it will be a throwaway line, and will go really well. So you never know what's actually going to work anyway.
What's the best tweet you've ever put out in your opinion?
Oh, trying to remember. So I don't remember a lot of them. This is my problem because I kind of do them and move on to the next. You're always trying to come up with something else. But trying to think I've had a few. I can't remember them all. One that I can remember about Melbourne that I liked was, I think when they sacked Neild, I did something about Melbourne have sacked another coach. As always, it's a good sign, a good reminder to change your smoke alarm battery. Because there's that period where we would, you remember what that was like. It was, were we ever going to keep a coach, it seemed, for a while.
Yep.
Oh, we do know that. Are there any particular controversies that had you licking your lips? Like, I imagine the Essendon drug scandal, was a goldmine of material. So any other controversies out there that...
Well, the Essendon one was great, so much to the point where, and I hope that he doesn't mind me telling this story, but I actually caught up with Xavier Campbell once for a coffee, who's the CEO of Essendon, and he contacted me, and he just contacted to say he was a fan. He didn't want anything or tell me off or anything, which I was surprised, because when he contacted me and said, we should catch up for a coffee, I thought he was going to tell me off for just bagging Essendon for about 4 years straight. But he did say, you can pay for the coffee because I've given you so much free material, which I thought was a good line. The Richmond stuff's always good. Richmond are just, they're like the iron ore of kind of, footy jokes. They're kind of, they're the rock that it's built on.
Blue chip investment.
Yeah, that's right. They're the blue chip stock. I thought Freo were going to be good for jokes this year, but they've been terrible because they started to play well. I mean, Melbourne have had their fair share of craziness that have, but that comes in from so much. So much though. I interviewed Nathan Jones for Channel 7, and they didn't put this on to air, but he was really nice. But when I went in, he said, "God, you've given us a hard time," and he said, "I think I unfollowed you at one point." And I laughed and said, "Oh, I think you followed me back. I didn't realise you had unfollowed me." And he goes, "No, I follow you again." And he said, "Oh, you've been harsh on us, though. You've been really harsh." And I said, "Oh, yeah, but, it's only because it's only because I care." And he goes, "Yeah, I know, mate. I felt that way too." So he was really funny about it. And I said to him, "Nathan, have you felt over the last 10 years like you've been trapped in the worst group assignment in the history of time?" And he said, "Yes."
On that note, have you ever sort of gotten in trouble for anything that you've tweeted, like where you've had sort of blowback from either a player or some other target of your tweets? You ever been told to tone it down, either from anyone?
No, I've never had anything. I mean, I assume there's got to be a few people who wouldn't like me. I mean, as in the people who the only person I ever know so I think if anyone does have a problem with me, I've never bumped into them or they've never told me. But the only footballer I'm aware of to have blocked me is Alex Rance. Remember when Alex Rance punched or elbowed Jack Watts in the back of the head?
Yep.
We all remember that.
Yes.
And I tweeted something about, gutless and weak because it's like shooting Bambi. Jack Watts is a nice guy. You don't elbow him in the back of the head while he's lying prone on the ground. I mean, you shouldn't elbow anyone like that, but especially Jack. And so I tweeted in defence of Jack, and so Alex Rance blocked me. So, no big loss not being able to see Alex Rance's tweets. You'd be surprised to learn.
I've seen some of his material on the Footy Show, and I've got to agree with you on that front. He's a strange cat, isn't he?
I wondered who watched the Footy Show. It's you.
Yeah.
You're the audience.
Yeah, that's me.
Hi. Who am I doing this show with? So, Titus, how often do you get people who blatantly miss the satire of your posts or articles? Like those people who stumble upon and then rage share an onion story. Do you ever get gullible people, berating you, believing what you've written is true?
Yeah, I get a lot. It's one of my great joys to get people not understand it. But they fall into two categories. So I either get people who think it's real and get angry with me or correct me and point out that I'm an idiot or something. So I did one when this was a soccer one, but when Australia qualified to go to Brazil World Cup, I said, "Oh, finally my Spanish lessons pay off." And all these people corrected me that they speak Portuguese there, which is, of course, the whole point of it. The whole point was I was meant to be an idiot. But the worst thing is I get all these people who just go, "You're an idiot, you're an ignorant bastard," and all that. So I got all that. But the worst is the people who are fans and who contact me, like they'll message me, so away from the public eye, and they'll say, "Oh, look, Titus, I saw your tweet saying you said Spanish. It's actually Portuguese there." And they'll be doing it in a nice way, not in a "you're an idiot" way. And then I feel better. Then I do feel a bit bad.
So do you read through all the responses and all the private messages and the rest of it, do you? I would have thought there'd be too much to get through it all. I
read all the DM. Like if someone DMs me, I'll read it, or emails me. I'll always read those. I pretty much can read most stuff. On Twitter, I can read most stuff. On Facebook, it's got to the point where, on a few posts, not all, but on a few, I get like 200 to 600 comments.
Wow.
And so sometimes I'll flick through them, and other times you just don't get time, or depends what mood I'm in or how much work I've got to do. But yeah, so sometimes I will and, read it and stuff. But, it's sort of, mainly when people contact me directly, I don't sort of go looking for comments, because the minute you do that, you find someone saying, "I'm the least funny person they've ever heard."
Yeah.
Which might be true, but, you don't want to read that.
No, definitely not. So, besides AFL, what other sports do you follow? And have you chosen similar teams with the same luck as the Ds? Because, you know, I'm picking you as a Bangladeshi cricket fan or possibly a pre-2004 end of the 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝗁𝘀 Red Sox fan.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of balanced my sports portfolio with a variety of blue chips and constant failures. So I follow all the American sports, but most of them I've followed like through like traveling to the places or seeing them first, various ones. So I'm a 49ers fan back to the 80s.
When they were successful.
Where they were very successful, and that was complete luck because I was too young to really know what I was doing. They were just the first team I ever saw. They're a bit like Hawthorn, where we say, oh, yeah, but we had a tough few years in the middle. Although, actually, they've been useless ever since the 90s. I go for the Rangers and the Yankees in the hockey and the basketball and the baseball because that was the first city I went to over there and went to those sort of games. And so the Yankees couldn't be more different than Melbourne, so they kind of balance out my, the awfulness. And then I also go for the Knicks because of that. I'm not into basketball as much, and they're basically Melbourne in NBA form, really. So it hasn't all worked out perfectly. And then I go for the Storm and the Victory in Melbourne, and so it's kind of sad to me that in my following the A-League, I've had more premierships or grand finals in the last 10 plus years than in my entire life of following the Demons. It's not lost on me.
But it's not the same feeling. If we get
but the first time I've been at the grand finals that Victory have won, and it's a great feeling. Like I remember really enjoying it, but it wasn't. You don't have that. You don't have that. What is it? I wasn't crying.
Yeah.
which I would be if Melbourne won.
Yes.
I still watch the replay of us beating Hawthorn from last year, like it's the grand final. So,
I say that to everyone I speak to. That was, for me, that was a final for me.
I know, that was like our... I mean, can you imagine what it would be like? I mean, that's the thing talking to Melbourne supporters, I say, can you imagine? And we all go, no, I can't actually imagine.
I have a friend who's a Bulldogs supporter, as I am a Melbourne supporter, he's a Bulldogs supporter. And I'm so jealous of him because what he went through last year is exactly what I hope to one day go through. Yeah.
Well, I know Danny McGinlay quite well, and the Bulldogs banner rider, and he's been he was telling me all about it because he was just really, pumped about it. And I sort of had him on the podcast a few times before the weeks leading up to the grand final where he just couldn't believe it. So I've sort of seen someone up close go through it. Actually, that was one time I did a tweet that got people upset because Danny McGinlay, I'd seen him the day before the grand final, and he said to me, I said, how are you feeling? And he said, if we don't win, I'll probably be jumping off a bridge. Just that was his throwaway comment.
Can't say that these days.
Yeah, well, he just said that, so I then tweeted on the night of the grand final, great win by the Bulldogs. Only negative is Danny McGinlay won't throw himself off the bridge. And he knew, and I included him in the tweet, and he knew exactly what it meant, laughed. But I got about 20 people say, thinking I didn't know the backstory. So they all thought I just wanted Danny McGinlay to throw himself off the bridge if grand final had been lost. So
he got in trouble, didn't he, this week for tweeting something? It was on one of the footy shows. I can't remember what it was now.
He had a banner suggestion, a fake banner that he didn't do that said something about lick those pussies or something for the Geelong.
That's right. Yep.
And footy, it was hilarious because Caroline Wilson and 𝗟𝗋𝗀𝘀𝗁𝘀 on Footy Classified. Caro was saying how it was terrible, but they had 𝗟𝗋𝗀𝗀𝗀 setting it up. And so there's Craig Hutchinson acting like he's all offended by it.
Yes.
He's worked in footy all his life as a footy journalist, and he's acting like this has really upset him.
Yep, I saw that. Now, before we get on, we've spoken a little bit about your Melbourne connection and your Melbourne roots. We'll get onto that in a moment, but I just wanted to ask, you've got your blog, you're in the Herald Sun these days, you're on radio, the podcast, social media, you're all over the place. I presume now it's a full-time gig for you, or do you have a separate day job? Where are you sort of at with that, and what's next for Titus?
Well, it's a full-time gig now. I managed to go full-time, so I write for my own site, and I've got now supporters who, support me sort of in a model where they just, it's not, didn't want to have a paywall. And when I was with the Herald Sun, often it would go behind a paywall. So I've put it all back on my site and said, look, if you guys pay me an amount, I'll keep it beyond the paywall. So I have sort of, you can read it all for free, but a lot of people actually will support me and donate. So that that kind of helps. And then I also do Nova Breakfast every Monday with Sam Pang and `𝗟𝗍 and Jonathan Brown, which has been good. I've been doing some stuff for Channel 7 of TV, some interviewing players, which has been good. That's been interesting. TV's a different thing. And then I've just written a book, which Penguin Random House will be publishing, which will come out in time for Christmas, which is a history of Australian sport, but in the Titus style. So that's sort of what I'm up to at the moment. And then I've done a bunch of live gigs. So I've started doing lots of live shows, and we'll be announcing a tour later in the year. We'll be doing Perth, Adelaide, Sydney, a few in Melbourne, and probably Hobart and Canberra as well. So I've done quite a few live sort of stand-up gigs recently. I did Comedy Store a couple of weeks ago in Sydney, and I've done down here. And then I did a couple of live gigs with Dane Swan the other day, the other month, me interviewing him.
I was going to ask you about that. How did that come about?
Well, I got asked. Someone was putting together a thing with Dane Swan being interviewed, and they had someone in mind to interview him, and then said, "Do you want to interview him? It might be a bit more interesting if it's not just a traditional football journalist."
Yeah.
So I said, "Oh yeah, I'll do that." And they said, "You can ask him anything. He doesn't care. You can talk about the drugs. You can talk about Federation Square. You know, when he got in that brawl."
Yeah.
So anyway, so I said, "Okay, we'll do that." And then we did it. And I said so it was kind of funny because I didn't meet him until the night. And he actually was a really nice guy, in my interactions with him, and was quite on stage, incredibly funny. I was surprised how funny he was, completely not how he sort of comes across like that a bit in the media, but actually backstage we were chatting. He had some really interesting views on footy and everything that were, about how the games run and all this sort of stuff. But the funniest bit of the night is I said to him, we were doing it at this club, and they brought it backstage to our dressing room. They brought a big silver bucket, like a huge bucket that fitted 30 Carlton drafts with ice in it as well. And so I said to him, it'd be funny, because I went out and did 15 minutes of stand-up before introducing him. I said, it'd be funny if you come out carrying that like that's yours to drink. And so he did, and it got a big laugh. But then he proceeded to drink the prop. So he drank like 6 beers to my 1. He could drink. So it was an interesting night, me just making sure he was remembering what to talk about, keeping him going as I sat there looking very soft, and then ended up having some beers with him afterwards, which when I started this, I didn't kind of think I'd be having a beer one night with Dane Swan. It's sort of like, it's sort of one of those things you must do in Melbourne, I guess.
Very surreal. So now to the important stuff. Which black cat did you stab with a broken mirror whilst walking under a ladder to become a 𝗍 supporter? Well, the worst thing for me is I didn't inherit it from from family or anything. Didn't? Wow.
Don't tell me you chose it.
I chose this life. So I grew up in a household where my family were my family, extended family, not immediate, were Collingwood supporters. So I dodged a bullet there. And we grew up barracking more for the VFA because of family connections and a few things, and had some people involved in that. So I was actually a Williamstown supporter growing up at the very early days, and was kind of almost it was a weird little group of people, or not weird group of people, but a group of people that kind of acted like the VFA was still the equal competitor to the VFL, if you know what I mean. It was, they really almost believed that. So we kind of were like not into it that much. And then I remember going to, when I was quite young, going to the first game at the MCG, and it was just happened to be a Melbourne game, and going, wow, like this is a bit bigger than a VFA game.
Yeah.
I was kind of remembering being, as a kid, surprised at how many people there were, and you know, no one belted each other and things like that. And, you know, so it was Melbourne. So I just started barracking for them because I thought they would be, because they won that one first game, I thought they'd be amazing. And then by coincidence, while I was still quite young, I mentioned to a few people that I liked Melbourne, and the guy that lived behind our house, or, you know, in the house behind our house, he didn't just randomly live behind our house. It's sort of a creepy kind of troll-like person. No, it was a guy who lived behind us. He was a Melbourne supporter and was involved in one of the supporters club. Like, he was mad, went every week. And so did his son. So he said, well, you're welcome to come with me to any game you ever want. And so we did, and they were the sort to drive to, you know, Geelong and Waverley and, you know, wherever. Not a lot of interstate. They did sometimes. But so I just...
So what years are we talking about?
This is like back in the late 80s, early 90s.
Gotcha. Yep. So we're going
so
right
it was, you know, and then, you know, it coincided with some of the players, like, you know, I can remember being captivated when 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗃 exploded.
Yeah.
You know, for those brief moments, you know, and, you know, it was Rodney Grinter and all these guys. Like, you know, Melbourne had some okay players for a while there, you know. It wasn't all bad, you know. We used to kid ourselves we might be going somewhere.
Oh,
and
I would give anything for that now.
Oh, yeah, that was you know. And I literally for about 10 years, all through my teens, went to every Melbourne Victorian game, no matter what. I was like obsessed. And then that dropped off a bit, just still went obsessed and went a lot. But because of work and a few things, I just, you know, couldn't go every single game like that. But I still went a lot through that. And then I ended up living in Richmond in my 20s, and I backed for and I was, of course, an MCC member, being a Melbourne supporter. And so I just went to games all the time then as well. So, yeah, it was sort of, that's how I just loved it from the moment. And, you know, it still amazes me how upset I get at, like, just things like the weekend where we really should know better. But, you know, it still gets to me. I still care. And you sometimes wonder why you do.
Well, we'll have a chance to moan and groan about that in a moment. We spoke earlier about Mark Neild and Dean Bailey. Which rebuild has been your favourite?
Well, easily the Neild one. I mean, bring, you know, everything from the naming the jacks, the captains, and just watching someone have a mental breakdown in real time was kind of amazing, you know. Like, if you didn't barrack if you didn't care, if it was just you were watching it, you know, from afar, it was just really quite amazing. And it kind of felt like we kind of all knew early that it was going that way too. I felt like the fans made their mind up a lot quicker, and they were just so badly run, that club, for so long, weren't they? That was just, I mean, I kind of blame Neild a bit, but I kind of also look at, I mean, Cameron Schwab is kind of my number one, you know, but, you know, of all the people, like, sometimes when I'm tweeting, I think about certain people and I think, gee, I've been a bit harsh on them for a while. You know, I better stop or it's going to seem like, you know, I've got a vendetta against them or something. And, you know, so if I'm making quite a few Travis Cloak jokes or something, that might be a case. But Cameron Schwab is one I'll never forgive and always take the cheap shot.
You're not the Lone Ranger there. He's
not
a particularly
Every
popular
true
person
Melbourne supporter that knows what's going on, I think, feels pretty much the same as me there. I don't think you know. But
the shame of that is that if you'd ever spoken to Cameron, his heart was absolutely in the right place, and he was a very passionate, and still is a very passionate Melbourne man. It just went, it was all upside down, unfortunately, but it wasn't through ill will.
No, I didn't. I never felt like that, but it was just, it was. I mean, just, the stories, you could go on forever about them, but the way they ran it, the way they spoke, the things they focused on, I mean, it's almost a joke how, what is it with Melbourne, administrations and their love of a logo change?
Yeah, the logo, the blazers that they had made the players wear.
Yeah, the blazers were the Sergio Paradise, who I do the podcast with, and is a mad Demon supporter. He brings up the blazer every day we talk, and I have to tell him you need to tone down the blazer anger, but that's what it's like. But it's
they're probably a collector's item on eBay.
Yeah,
I must find
thousands.
Remember the stars on the back of the jumper?
Yes.
And the idea was they represented all our premierships, and they were going to connect the circle eventually. Do you remember that?
I didn't know that they were going to connect the circle, but
that was
had a missing star.
That was the thing, had a missing star, and the idea was that's where our next premiership would represent our next premiership. And, it didn't even last long enough for us to ever fill it. But I could just imagine knowing, because I've worked in a lot of corporations in previous life and stuff, and and everyone knows what work is like. Can you imagine how many hours they debated those stars?
Yeah.
And then they wonder why they weren't developing players and, because they were all sitting around as like a year 10 graphic designs course,
There was all that focus on the past as well, and nobody was paying any attention to the present or the future. Reliving the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, and a lot of Demons fans weren't there for that. It means nothing to you that we won in, that we were dominant in the 50s. We all know that doesn't mean anything. It's like when Collingwood fans now pull out. They've had more recent ones, or Carlton fans, they say to me, well, we've won more premierships than anyone else. And you're like, seriously, that's what you're going to bring up after, the way you've been?
Yeah, it's pretty sad. So, as, being a satirist, do you think it's easier for you being a D's fan than, say, being, a Hawks fan? And what I mean by that is does the tragedy of being a D's fan, make you so bitter and jaded that it enables you to find the humour in the dark places where, say, if you followed Hawthorn and you've enjoyed the armchair ride to success, that acerbity might not have blossomed as it has?
Yeah, I kind of think, I'm sure it probably has. I think, you can't not have a dark... any of us that have got through the last, 10 years have had to develop a pretty good ability to find the gallows humour in it, which is why I often get along with Richmond supporters, because they're in the exact same boat, But I've always been kind of careful to try and be an equal opportunity offender across all the clubs, including my own. Because I kind of don't want to favour Melbourne either, and I do worry if we suddenly become good. It'll be a good problem to have, but, will that change things? But, you're kind of just poking fun at the ridiculousness of footy, so it's kind of a pretty rich vein to mine. I keep thinking, will I ever be short of jokes? And then, the AFL announces they're going to have a wildcard weekend or something. They seriously give me so much, so I don't need to wait very long. But it does help. But the funny thing I find about being a Melbourne supporter is whenever I make a joke about any club, they say, I always get like a small percentage of people going, pretty rich coming from a Melbourne supporter, because that's all they can really say, if you know what I mean.
Yep.
But the best thing I get is whenever I make a joke, I get people who are often long-time fans, and they'll say, Titus, I really like your stuff and usually think you're very funny, but that tweet you did was way out of line. And I always look, and it's always about their club without fail. So,
Naturally.
joke will be a Carlton fan.
Yeah, they were always
like every joke except when you bagged my team.
Yeah, they're always the one they've got in there, wearing their footy jumper in the avatar.
Yeah, that's right. So that's what I always get. So that's when I get people upset with me more, when it's about their team. But look, all our teams aren't perfect,
You talked about the AFL giving you endless material, to change the punching rules midweek this week. I read something from the head of the umpires, Peter Schwab, also earlier this week, about players standing the mark. Let me just read this quote to you, because it sounds like it's something from a Monty Python skit. There's a couple of things involved. One was in that part of the ground, which was the last third of the ground. The actual bloke on the mark doesn't have to go east-west. He can go off on a line tangent because of the way you line them up for goal. It's 2/3 east-west when you are defending, and when you come into your attacking third and you're lined up with the middle of the goal, you can go on that arc.
What does that mean?
What?
So it's clear as day.
Your players are north-south oriented, and they struggle to go 2/3 east-west in the defensive third. What are you going to do then?
I didn't bring a compass or a protractor to this conversation.
That's when someone just starts talking and they haven't really figured out what they're going to say, and so it's just emerging as you listen. I mean, but this is my favourite one, and that fits. I hadn't heard that one. That's terrific. That's great. My favourite one in recent years was remember they brought in the shot clock, and then Mason, I think it was Mason Wood in a game, just ran the clock down by holding the ball because it was right up against 4/4 time, and they said, and so everyone said, well, that's not in the spirit of the game. But you're like, well, but that's the rules. Like he's got whatever it is, 29 seconds or whatever to kick the ball. He doesn't have to kick the ball until the end. And so the AFL brought in a rule, instead of getting rid of the stupid shot clock that no one ever wanted or asked for, and we've had 150 years of footy without it. They said, we're going to keep the shot clock, and you've got 30 seconds to kick the ball, but you can be penalised if you don't look like intent enough that you're going to kick the ball in 30 seconds.
Yep.
So basically it becomes judging someone on their acting ability. Like you're allowed to take the full 30, but you have to spend that whole 30 seconds not just standing there doing nothing. You have to put on an act like you're going to kick the ball, but you still don't have to kick it any quicker. So that was their solution, and it's still the law of the land in the AFL. And this is, it's just bizarre. If you do wonder what they're smoking, that's what I often ask them when I talk to these people.
It's very similar to the deliberate out of bounds rule that they're starting to penalise players for a bad kick, that sprays off the side of the boot. So, where does it end?
Well, it's also about intent now, isn't it?
Yeah, well, how much of the rules now are about intent? It's just madness, it's that, these umpires need to sort of be psychologists or, psychics. So, yeah, it is. It's crazy. But they never mind a tinker, and then they never mind another tinker to fix the earlier tinker. So it's a jobs program, basically.
It's interesting. The umpires did lodge this week with the AFL an OH&S claim about bouncing the ball. We've had 120 years where umpires used to bounce it all day, not just in the centre bounce after a goal, and yet now they can't do it, 9 times a game. It's dangerous hazardous to their health. So.
What, bad for their back or something?
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what they say.
The guy is just, there's so much nonsense around them. It's no wonder you've got a wealth of material to work with, I guess.
Well, between the AFL itself and then the footy media more generally, I'm never sure. I rarely look at it and go, oh, there's nothing to make fun of this week.
Yep. So, a question that many on this forum have asked, because your material does get posted up on Demonland, people sharing tweets or some of the pieces off your website, and then inevitably people respond saying that Titus is a Demons fan. and everyone wants to know, do you post on Demonland? And if you don't post on Demonland, do you read Demonland?
I don't post on it. I don't post on Big Footy either, or any of the sort of forums. And that was more just. It's more just out of the fact that through Twitter mainly.
You've got your other outlets already.
Well, it's just so all-consuming. That and Facebook, and then the blog was all-consuming. The times I ever dip into footy forums is sometimes when someone posts one of my things that comes, you can see where traffic comes from, and so suddenly you'll see you're getting a bunch from AFL Reddit, or it'll say Demonland or Hawks headquarters or something. And so every now and then I'll pop in and just see what people are saying, because you can sort of tell if they're going well or not. And sometimes I laugh because sometimes some people come up with jokes about it. They add something like, and I think, that's funnier than what I came up with. I'd pinch that if I didn't think I'd get caught. And then other times you go on, but then sometimes I try and avoid it because you go into some, I can't remember on Demonland, but more on every now and then when I've wandered onto Big Footy to check something or look at something of why the traffic's coming. You get all these people going, this guy's the least funny guy, or he's jumped the shark or something. So you kind of, you kind of laugh but move on. So I don't trawl the forums for material or a lot, but every now and then I'll go on, and it's kind of funny because, reading when I have read Demonland, it's just like, the voices in my head playing out, really.
Yeah. Fair call.